Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Discovery Season 2 Episode 6, The Sound of Thunder. This video is a part of a series of videos where I cover episodes of Star Trek Discovery, so I'll have to start with a spoiler warning for Discovery up to Season 2 Episode 6. If you haven't seen it up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So, just a little preamble or a little house cleaning or just some more background info before I get into the episode itself. I was thinking more about my Discovery reviews and how I view Star Trek Discovery overall, and I don't know, I kind of get the impression that I'm being too positive on the episodes, that I give it too high of a rating, that once I look back on Discovery Season 2 like years later, I'm actually going to think a lot less of it and say, oh, I gave that episode an 8, it really deserved a 6. But I don't know, who knows. That's a hard thing about doing these reviews like the moment or the day after the episode drops, is that it doesn't really give you much time to sort of contemplate and think about it. I think this show in particular, I think I do need a whole lot more time to sort of to let this digest, because my initial reaction, particularly for episodes like these, is to just be like, wow, that's awesome, I'm going to give this a 9, this episode's amazing. But the more you think about it, the more you think, well, is it really though? Does these things work here? Does this actually work? And so that's what I think about this episode here, is while I was watching it, I was thinking about giving it a 9. And the more I think about it, the more I found faults with it. So it's kind of split, because there were some things in this episode that were really done really well and really amazing and made me want to give it praise and make me just think, oh, this is a great episode, I'm gonna like it, this is so good. But then there's other things in the episode that's like, well, actually no, this doesn't really work. This doesn't really make any sense. So anyway, let's go ahead and get into it. So first, let me start with the positive. I think this episode, the way it begins, I really like. I can't find fault with how it begins, with them finding a signal that just so happens to be over Saru's home planet. And I like how they call this out. They draw attention to the fact that, well, this can't be a coincidence. And so and I like the philosophical discussion about the Red Angel and how Section 31 sees it more as a threat. And Burnham was talking about how they kind of assumed that it was helpful, but maybe that's a false assumption, that maybe it's not benevolent after all. So that was interesting. And then once we get to Saru's homeworld and see how Saru, the inner conflict, I think, within him was played off really well, and how he really wants to help his people, but is kind of restricted from doing so from General Order 1. And I love the confrontation that he has with Pike on the bridge. Like, that felt very sort of natural. And it's a nice touch to how Saru sat on the captain's chair and didn't really want to give it up, and Pike just had to stare at him for a few seconds. It's like, oh! And it shows how invested Saru was in this situation, because it was very personal for him. I mean, he had family that he left behind. It was his home world, and his people are basically being oppressed at the moment, and he's forbidden to do anything about it. So it's a really interesting moral quandary, and I think the way they played it in these first few scenes was great. And I think Pike is always great. I think he's one of the highlights of the show of season 2, and I love the way his interactions with Saru, particularly when they clashed and he ended up kicking Saru off the bridge, which I think was justified, because Saru sort of interrupted. He told Saru not to say anything to the Balrul, but he purposely interrupted, and it's like, fuck you. It's like he was stoking, he was instigating them. I do think that they could have made more clear what the Balrul's relationship with Starfleet, because the Balrul mentioned Starfleet, so they're aware of Starfleet, and they seem to have had a relationship with Starfleet, and they say like, oh, you need to leave us alone because you're Starfleet, you're not allowed to interfere. It almost seemed like they had a deal with them, so I wish they would have gotten to that more and fleshed that out a bit more. And also, like, getting interactions between when Saru and Burnham went to the planet, and seeing Saru meet his sister again, as much as, this is all, they even played flashbacks to the short, and I'm glad I actually watched. This is the only one of the short tracks that's actually relevant to the show, and it seems like you almost had to have watched it to get the full story, although probably not, because it was really short, and they kind of cover everything that happened in it, and they even show like flashbacks from that, and how they left. And I like how the meeting was rough, because it made sense, because she thought that he was dead, and she now thinks that he's violating everything that her planet stands for. And I like sort of the interactions between Burnham and Saru, and how their friendship has been established to be really close in the previous episode. So all of that worked for me. The issues of the episode, I think, mainly start coming in about halfway through, because again, at first I thought, wow, this is really awesome, like, because once Pike kicked Saru off the bridge, he went straight to the transporter to beam down, and I mean, someone should have been, realized this, and, like, instead of just kicking him off the bridge, they should have had security, or at least somebody, maybe not security if you don't want to be a dick, but someone say, hey, why don't you escort Saru to his quarters, or to a specific place, not just get off my bridge, okay, I'm going to go beam down and fuck everything up. But at least, Burnham was smart enough to realize that Saru might do something rash. So Burnham goes down and points a phaser at him, which I'm assuming it's set to stun because it's Burnham, but still it seems a bit of a, I don't know, too much of trying to ramp the tension up purposely, the whole phaser against Saru. But, she lets him beam down anyway, which I don't know. I didn't really get that. I guess it was supposed to be their friendship overriding it, but she knows. I don't know. It seems like if they were really friends, that he wouldn't let him do that. But yeah, because he's basically surrendering to the Baal rule to save his village. It seems like it would have been more interesting. I kept expecting them to be another way to get out of this situation, like a third option. I don't know, and it seems like Pike didn't do as good of a job like negotiating with them, and especially like this is when the relationship to Starfleet would have come in handy if they explored that more, and maybe Pike would have been able to, I don't know, push, have some influence over them because of that, but whatever. Instead, we just have Saru surrender, and for some unknown reason, I'm still not clear on this, the Baru simply beam up his sister next to him, and where they have that big, shocking reveal that they're this goo monster. It looks like it's from the movie. It's that girl from the from the movie The Ring. 7 days. Anyway, but whatever. I mean, I thought, of course, the visual special effects design and Discovery is always good. So it's always something that's really exciting, really good. But they get a bit crazy here. Now, I heard that some people had issues with the fact they went to the information they gathered on the spear, or the thingy from a couple episodes ago, to get the information about the Kelpians. I didn't mind that. I think that makes sense. I actually like how they're calling back to previous episodes. Some people think, it's going to become a crutch. It's going to become the Deus Ex Machina machine. Oh, let's just go to this information thing. But to me, it would be worse if, because in that episode they said, we're getting all this information about the world, about the universe around us, this recorded everything. And so for me, it would be worse if they simply never reference it again. Because, and this is stuff that, like, Next Generation Deep Space Nine has done before, and Voyager, and has irritated me. Because if you're going to make a declaration like that, like this is something, a game changer, something that's important, and just never reference it again, it's kind of bullshit. So I actually prefer that they reference it. And I can see how there's the danger of it becoming a Deus Ex Machina trap, but I don't think that's the way it was in this episode. It didn't seem too convenient that the thing had the information about the Kelpians and helped them figure out what was actually going on with the world. So I thought that was used very well. Now, from here on out is really where the episode gets a bit questionable, because then it gets really like, alright, so the main thing about this episode is it tries to do too much in a short amount of time. Like, there's too much story in this episode. Like, they go all the way from, figuring out that the Balrul were, wiped out the Kelpians, because the Kelpians, once they, evolved, went through their ritual, whose name I'm blanking on at the moment, and they became predators, and so the Balrul were the prey, and the Kelpians were the predators, so they had to control them, and they had this advanced technology so they can control them to make sure they never evolved or advanced to the point where they were a threat to the Balrul ever again. So it became sort of I don't know, like a slavery type situation. And so I think the Balrul were clearly in the wrong here. I heard some other possibility, some opinions out there that thought maybe the Balrul were, they're just as much as the victims of the Kelpians, but I don't. I think they're very clear cut. There's no excuse for them because to enslave a race like that. It seems to me, and the Balrul claim that the Kelpians, being these predators, were like going to destroy the natural order of their planet, and that they were too powerful. But I think that's bullshit, because if these species evolved naturally on this planet, it seems like in the natural environment nature would balance out, so that wouldn't really happen that way. I don't know, just my opinion, but I still think that the Balrul, there's no excuse for what they did to the Kelpians, enslaving them, lying, killing them off, and creating a religion that makes them believe that they should be killed off. I think there's no excuse for that. I think the Balrul are flat out the bad guys here, and there's just no way around it, no excuse. But anyway, yeah, so from here on out, there's too much story. There's too much happens. Once they figure out this balance, that all of a sudden, like, they get all the Kelpians to activate their whatever it's called and have them go into the next phase, and so they're all predators now. So it completely changes the nature of the Kelpians. It changes the nature of the Balrul, and it just does too much. And at the end of the episode, like, Saru's sister's like, I want to stay behind to oversee this change. Saru's like, well, I'm going back to Starfleet. Bye. They just take off. They drastically change the nature of the both species about the entire planet, and they're just fucking off now. And I just think they took it to too far in the extreme, to all of a sudden, like, I think it would have made more sense if it was a much longer, much slower process. The whole thing about using, and it seemed to come like story-wise, like all of a sudden, hey, let's use the same spear thingy that caused my evolution and causing all the Kelpians everywhere. That seemed like a very reckless decision, and it was in terms of story writing, it was too much. It was too drastic of a change. It didn't feel like a natural progression, natural storytelling. Now, the whole, like, way it played out on screen with, like, all the Balrul ships, like, surrounding the Discovery, and then them activating the things and wanting to kill off all the Kelpians in response, which, of course they would do that. It doesn't make any sense how Saru would actually be surprised about that, and Discovery was actually surprised about that. That was a bit silly, and they didn't really have a backup plan to stop them. But thank God that the Red Angel just happened to show up to save everything. And again, I have mixed feelings about this, because I like how it ties into the overall story of the Red Angel, and plus, as I said earlier, that the question at the start of this episode was, what are the Red Angel's intention? Is it benevolent, or is it hostile? And it was made clear cut, and how it reacted here, that it was benevolent, that it was actually wanting to help. And I find Ash Tyler's response to this is very annoying and very obtuse. Just there for plot purposes. Like, well, is it really benevolent? It could still be hostile, even because it totally changed. Blah, 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 blah. Shut up, Ash. You're being an idiot. And then that gets me into probably the biggest issue I had with this episode is Ash Tyler. When he was reintroduced into the show last episode, I said I didn't mind because I liked this character. It was great seeing the dynamic. But I don't like what they did with him in this episode. He was just being like Debbie Downer, and he's like, oh, I speak for Section 31, and Section 31 doesn't. Dude, you've been in Section 31 for all of like 2 days. I know some people will be like, well, Mark, more time has passed, it's been more than 2 days. I know, I'm just kidding, I'm exaggerating, being hyperbolic, but still, he's been in Section 31 for 2 days. And all of a sudden he's like, well, I'm Mr. Section 31, and I'm telling you what Section 31 wants. And plus, I still can't get used to the... I think this would be a hell of a lot... The use of Section 31 would be a hell of a lot more interesting if it was actually Section 31. And I went into this in my last review, and I heard a lot of comments trying to make excuses for this, which there's no excuse. I'm sorry, there's absolutely no excuse. And a lot of people were saying, well, maybe something's going to happen between Discovery and Deep Space Nine to make Section 31 more autonomous. But you're totally missing the point. You miss what I said. In Deep Space Nine, Section 31 was established to be autonomous from its creation 200 years ago, which would be 100 years before this. So they were always autonomous. And you could say, well, maybe they were autonomous to start with, but then they got more into the Federation, and then they became autonomous again. And that is very stretching it. That is very specious reasoning. And actually it makes no sense, because if they're not autonomous, they're well known, they're active member of Starfleet intelligence that pretty much everyone on Discovery is aware of. There's no way they can go back to being this unknown, ominous, autonomous organization that they are in Deep Space Nine. I'm sorry, it's just not possible. So this is total bullshit, and it still upsets me. And because I think if this was an actual Section 31 agent who was like this, autonomous, ominous agent who's more in the shadows, who's not actively working with Starfleet in order to do so by an admiral, it would actually be a lot more interesting. And plus, if they get someone who is an actual member of Section 31, not someone who joined 2 days ago. So, and plus, I like the character of Ash Tyler from Season 1, and what they're doing with him now, they might as well not have him. He's just there to be like, oh, well, blah, 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 blah. Maybe they're Red Angels hostile. Just shut up. They're throwing him away. I'd rather them not bring him back at all if this is all they're going to do with him. So that's my biggest complaint about this episode. And then there's also the Dr. Culber stuff I actually did really like. I thought that was interesting. I don't have much to say about it now because it was nice little character members. It was showing how disconnected he felt and how weird it was being resurrected, and they even addressed how his whole body is new, and it's not really this kind of is him, but it kind of isn't, and how he's very disturbed by this, and Stamets is oblivious to all this because he's just happy to have his lover back. So they didn't do much. This is obviously setting up for a long-term story arc, which I think is great, but I can't really say much about it because they're just setting the stage, just setting the pieces for this, so I'll have to wait and see. But I was very pleased with it, and I'm very curious to see where they'll take this storyline in the future. So anyway, my rating for The Sound of Thunder out of 10 it's going to be a 7, very good. And it has to set at one point, I was even thinking of giving this episode a 9 or an 8, but then once I realized how disjointed, if you look at this episode as a whole, look at the story they were telling, it's very disjointed. They rushed through the ending. They made too drastic of the worldwide change that happened way too quick, and they kind of just glossed over it, and the Discovery just fucked off at the end. But on the other hand, that all, and plus Ash Tyler, what they did with him really pissed me off. But on the other hand, all that to me wasn't enough to say this was a bad episode, and it sucked because there was still a lot of good in it. There was a lot of great character moments with Saru and Pike, as I said. I like what they did with Culber. I like what they did with Michael Burnham and Saru's relationship, and I loved like the tension. The special effects were amazing. So it was still, I would say it's a good episode, but a flawed one. Anyway, that is it for my review of The Sound of Thunder. I will be back in a week for next episode, episode 7 of Star Trek Discovery. So be sure to check that out. Also check out my channel as I do many more Star Trek videos, as well as covering other shows like Game of Thrones, Lost, The Expanse, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.